Welcome to the first video on this best ball channel, where we are probably targeting new best ball users, going over the basics of best ball, and we're doing that for a couple reasons. Number one, selfishly, so I can talk through things and make sure that I'm doing it strategically versus just picking players. And then number two, ideally, you as a new user get to understand some of the basics and maybe a couple extra nuggets thrown in there as well. And ideally, we grow at the same time. Give me feedback as well. Would love to hear what you're thinking. Do you think I'm totally off on what I'm saying? Or do you agree? Also, do you like the format? Do you not like the format? Or is there something else that you'd like to see with that? Let's jump into quarterbacks today as the first video. And we have an underdog draft here. We're going to talk some of the basics of quarterbacks, and then we'll talk about a little deeper in a couple places as well. So some basics, and this first basic is probably true for all positions. You have quantity and quality, and if you have high quality, you probably want lower quantity, and if you have low quality, then you probably want higher quantity. Basically, if you have really good, high draft capital, meaning the first couple rounds, so the earlier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, the earlier you draft your quarterbacks, the less of them you want. The later you wait to draft your quarterbacks, the more of them that you want. Quality versus quantity. When we're drafting our quarterbacks, we probably want to try to stack them. And one that I can see right away is, for example, we have the Chargers quarterback along with the Chargers pass catcher in Ladd McConkey. Oftentimes you're trying to stack the quarterbacks with their pass catchers, whether that's wide receivers or tight ends. Occasionally a running back, but more often it's the wide receivers and tight ends. Don't go overboard with the stacking. Oftentimes, or what you can get in trouble with is if you stack and you pull up someone way too early and you lose out on a quality player just to stack with someone of much less quality. So stacking is good, but if you go overboard, it might be bad. What are the benefits of stacking? Number one, you're making one bet on one team versus 10 different bets on 10 different teams, meaning if one thing goes right, you get to see your whole team hopefully do better versus if you have a bunch of different teams, then if that one team does well and the rest don't do well, then your team doesn't do as great. So less concentrated bets helps maybe rise when things go well. We are going for first place here. Not we don't care about the rest of the places in general when it comes to the end result. We're going for all the money, and to get all the money, you need to go for a high end outcome, not a middling outcome. Uh, Now, when we look at some of these teams here, we can see maybe how they did from a quantity and quality perspective. I'm not going to go over player takes for the most part here, but let's just talk about individual teams. But actually, before we go over individual teams, though, oftentimes you're going to see between one quarterback taken and four quarterbacks taken. You can see if you look up here, you look at how many quarterbacks were taken on these teams. Everyone went between two, and one team went four. More teams are doing three these days than anything else. Why are teams doing three? Number one, uh, there have been a lot of simulations done over the past year or so that keep on saying that three quarterbacks are the best, the more likely to get the best results. Don't have to do three, but that's what the simulations are saying. Number two, this most recent year, there were a lot of injured quarterbacks. So teams that only had two quarterbacks had a hard time advancing and then doing well in the playoffs. And that third quarterback was the savior sometimes of your team, helping you either advance or win in the playoffs or um, get to the next payout in the playoffs. And number three, right now this year, there's only about 24 quarterbacks that are like starting quarterbacks. And so there's more competition going on right now for quarterbacks. And sometimes you get stuck in positions where you might only have one true starter. And then you need, again, to have more quantity because you might have less quality. So all these things going on are probably making it so there's more three quarterback builds instead of two quarterback builds. I think two is totally okay. In fact, I probably will do two more often than three unless someone lets you do three. Right now, it's harder. I think it's going to get harder and harder to do three the right way, which might lead me to do more two. But I think three is totally okay. let's go over some of these teams now. Starting over here at the 12 team in the 12 hole, you can see they have three quarterbacks. Their first quarterback was in the fifth round, and then they waited until the 12th and 13th round for their next two quarterbacks. Now, this is a good example of trying to balance quality and quantity. You get one that is in the early rounds, and then you wait until the middle rounds to grab your other two. You could argue that you only need two quarterbacks here. Or again, if you prefer, you can grab three based again what on the simulations say and everything else. But this is a good example where you're safe with three here, and you could also be safe and say you're good with two, depending on what you want to accomplish. The next one here is our 1-4 quarterback build. They waited all the way until round 9 for their first quarterback, and then they waited until round 14 for their second quarterback, and then they went all the way down into the last two rounds for their last two quarterbacks. And so you can see they spent less quality compared to the previous team, and they ended up getting more quantity. Uh, this is another one where if you wanted to go on maybe the risky side, you could only go two quarterbacks and maybe get away with it, or definitely get three quarterbacks and you'd be okay as well. They wanted to go four, and that's totally acceptable here also, but you don't need to go four on this one if you don't want to. In fact, what I would prefer if I was doing four quarterbacks, oftentimes is I'm trying to push those quarterbacks as far down the board as possible so that I have more, again, quantity than I do quality. Now that's hard with how the quarterbacks are getting drafted. For example, the last kind of guaranteed starter to start the year is down here in round 15. And so if you're drafting any quarterbacks after round 15, it's harder to get guaranteed starters on your team. So I think they did a fine job in what's going on here with their four quarterbacks. Again, I'm not saying they're the right ones, but it makes sense from a quality versus quantity perspective. The next team got three quarterbacks, and they waited until round 10 for their first quarterback, which is fine. And then they went all the way down to the two of the last three rounds to get their second and third quarterback. So we just were talking about how the last starter is kind of in round guaranteed starters around 15 now. They have Sanders, who maybe is the starter for the Browns, and they have Simpson, who's a rookie who's not projected to start the year as a starter and maybe not even play the entire year. So they kind of only have one starting quarterback in a way, and then two other quarterbacks. So they definitely are low on quality from just what you'd expect right now. And you could say they um, are less quantity than the team right before it as well, and that took the four quarterbacks. So this maybe is on the cusp of not enough. Either you don't have enough quality, or you don't have enough quantity. Um, I think it's probably a quality thing more than a quantity thing, in that I think it would be great if he ended up with one of these other low tier quarterbacks. I'm sure he just got boxed out, missed out on it for whatever reason, and ended up with these ones. Probably want to avoid this in general. It could work out. Again, you can have one quarterback and still win if that quarterback does great. He got this quarterback in the 10th round, so if Bo Nix does awesome, and then one of these other guys ends up starting for at least part of the year and at the right times, this could be a great team either way, but probably a little bit of imbalance when it comes to quality and quantity. Next one, here's a three quarterback build. They got two in the middle, rounds 9 and 10, and then waited until round 17 for their third one. This is kind of what you're seeing a lot of times right now, and in fact, the next team does it as well, where you're getting these quarterbacks in whatever in the sweet spot, whatever that is. It's usually like right here. Sometimes it's around 8, 9, 10 or so, maybe 11, and you can kind of see a bunch in 8, 9, 10, 11, and then kind of scattered after that. So, and I kind of expect maybe more quarterbacks to start popping up into this range or something like that. Some of these quarterbacks might come down into that range, and these ones might come up into that range. But yeah, two in the pocket for both of these teams, none above, just to confirm. And then they both actually took one in round 17 as well. Good examples of quantity versus quality right there. This is my team right here. You don't always have to obey the rules, and this team didn't. Josh Allen in the third, Jalen Hurts in the seventh. So we have high, very high quality And by taking the second one so early as well, and in fact, I took a third one much a little bit later on here, and Kyler Murray, um, I kind of have much higher quality than I need for how much quantity I have. So overall, this is probably not the right type of build, and we'll look at it a little bit more and see if we like it or not. And, um, sometimes you got to kind of see what happens when you do it and go from there. But definitely a little bit too much quality for how much quantity there is. You can see here's two other teams that maybe did the same type of thing a little bit, right? They got um, Jackson, Stafford, and Mahomes, three quarterbacks before the 10th round is a little intense as well. They stacked that one and that one, and I guess they stacked this one with a non-pass catching running back. So they kind of stacked it, kind of didn't stack it. So they stacked them. So I'm not saying that you can't do it, but definitely is high quality and high quantity. And you don't want both. You usually want, again, high quality or high quantity. You don't want both. This team has high quality with Williams and Burrow, and then they took Jones down here in the 18th. So they maybe did a better job than me a little bit in waiting another round. You could argue again with this team like this, just going with two. The other reason right now that teams are a lot of times doing three is they're afraid of the bye weeks. What happens if you draft two? They both have the same bye. Well, then you have no quarterbacks for that week, and that might be the difference between advancing and not advancing. So you could argue that three is good for that reason as well. Um, or you just kind of roll with two and roll the dice and hope for the best. There were two teams that did two quarterbacks. This one here, they got Prescott in the 8th and Stroud in the 15th. I dig it. Again, you could argue whether they're the right quarterbacks or not the right quarterbacks, but I think personally, in general, the more you can push to get the quarterbacks you want, the better. And I guess that's true for all positions. But if they correlate with your team and you're able to get them delayed, getting them further, I think that's great because again, if you stack your quarterbacks, which they did, at least hopefully they did, Pickens and Prescott, who knows if Pickens is going to be on the team or not, but Pickens right now, that's assumed he's going to make it onto the Cowboys. If Pickens does great, then Prescott probably does great as well. So that was the one you wanted. You didn't want these other guys. But if Pickens does bad, well, your second round pick doing bad might mean, or like if he gets hurt for the season or something like that, might mean your team is a little bit, DOA, not going to do great anyways. So it doesn't matter if you drafted a different quarterback because Pickens doing horrible was going to kind of sink your team anyways. So I do like the idea of trying to wait longer when it makes sense. So very cool how he did that. And healing with two, I dig it. Some risk, but I dig it. And then this is Dart and Mendoza as two. I like where he got his quarterbacks, like the 7th round and the 12th round, right before the pocket, right after the pocket. Again, balancing quantity and quality pretty well right there. You could argue whether those are the right quarterbacks or not. These ones might have a little bit more risk, so you might argue there's a little bit less quality in some ways with those compared to others, but I kind of like it. And then we'll just look one last team because I kind of saw it out of the corner of my eye. Similar to this team here, one a little early, not too early, one kind of in the middle, and then one at the very, very end. So I like that as far as quality and quantity goes too. So there's some examples of teams that balance quality and quantity well, and a couple that did not balance quality and quantity as well. Now, um, let's talk about some specific, not quarterbacks, but kind of where they're being drafted a little bit and if I like them or not. And we'll go to my team to talk about this. Um, I like the idea of two quarterbacks early because I feel like some of the running quarterbacks that were traditionally being drafted in like the 3rd round or 4th round are now going in the 5th, 6th, and 7th round. And the quarterbacks I'm talking about a little bit are, for example, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels would be 3 that I'm thinking about as far as that goes. These other ones, actually, maybe some running as well, and Williams, May, and Herbert, varying extents for the 3 of them. So if you like them, cool. I expect them to maybe kind of drop down the board a little bit, at least some of them, but you can justify it if you want to. But I kind of like these as some targets right here. Daniels, Hurts, and Lamar Jackson. Typically, your high rushing quarterbacks offer more upside because they can get points on the ground and then points with their arm also. And then Josh Allen here would be another one, but he's getting drafted much earlier. Now, I've come to the realization, I think, when looking at this, that I made a mistake and I'm probably not going to do this again. And but it's not just because of the quality versus quantity thing. I think it's what you're losing when you draft Allen in the third round versus what you're not losing when you draft Hurts in the seventh round or Daniels in the sixth round, or maybe even Lamar Jackson at the end of the fifth round, or you can maybe get him in the sixth sometime. Or that's the beginning of the fifth round here. Sorry, as far as that goes. Even maybe Jackson in the fifth round as well. So what are you when you're getting Allen in the third round? What are you gaining? I guess you're gaining the what most people consider the best quarterback. Um, does he have more upside than some of these other quarterbacks after though? I don't know if he has a whole ton more upside. For example, Lamar Jackson um, could score points with Josh Allen just as well if he didn't pull his hamstring. And Jaden Daniels, he's only a third year player now, but he was showing that he was going to be on a path to do some similar things also. So you could argue that Josh Allen has just brought more consistency to that outcome, and therefore he's getting drafted earlier because of that. So it makes sense why you can draft him earlier. But what do I feel like you're losing when you draft Josh Allen this early? You're losing out on drafting other players that you expect to have relatively high outcomes. Uh, Even if they don't have the best outcomes for one reason or another, you can expect some relatively high outcomes for um, a lot of these players, assuming there's no injuries to their teams. Uh, Again, some might have higher outcomes versus others, but you're expecting them all to get a lot of run for the most part and ideally have some pretty solid results because of it too. Now, when you get down here into round five and definitely into round six, you have equally talented players, like position players, but I think there's a little bit more risk to these players. And what we've seen over the last 2 years, and that's kind of where I've been focusing on best ball, by the way. So, um, call me out if I'm like totally wrong on something. But what we've been seeing across the last 2 years is shifts in what's going on where wide receivers were getting pushed and pushed and pushed up the board higher and higher and higher, then realizing, wait a minute, wide receivers are important, but bad wide receivers aren't that important. And so now we're trying to figure out like who's a good wide receiver, who's a bad wide receiver. And now certain wide receivers that we think are good wide receivers still aren't performing as well based on maybe shifts in how football's being played on the field. So I don't know what to expect out of the players here in the fifth round, but I, for the most part, do know what to expect out of the quarterbacks if things go, all things being equal, I guess. Uh, I expect pretty high end outcomes out of not just like pretty good, but high end outcomes out of Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, hopefully Jalen Hurts as well. But I don't know if I can say the same for rookie wide receivers, or if I can say the same about teams with lots of mouths to feed that maybe are more of a running team than a passing team in some ways. Again, mouths to feed right here too, and maybe demonstrating being the third wide receiver instead of the first or second. I might be wrong, but if you look at the end of last year, he was playing the third or fourth wide receiver more than he was the first or second wide receiver, or players that are finally demonstrating maybe the ability to stay on the field and not get injured. Um, And then it gets even more murky as we go further along. So I, I think you could argue that when you compare some of these quarterbacks to some of these wide receivers, you have, again, maybe super high end outcomes. And I mean, sure, maybe these guys have high end outcomes as well, but high end outcomes from these quarterbacks and questionable outcomes that maybe even if they hit what might be a high end outcome, there might be other things, or uh, even if they do some certain things that you'd think would lead to a high end outcome, maybe there's something else from holding them back from that high end outcome. For example, Egbuka is the awesome wide receiver you expect him to be, but he, for whatever reason, can't get past Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and McMillan still has a role, and therefore Egbuka just doesn't do as great. Watson was going to be the number one wide receiver on Green Bay, and there was going to be a focal point in the offense for the first time ever, but he pulls a hamstring. So those are the risks you're taking with those players. I kind of like the idea of grabbing the quarterbacks and then finding those other wide receivers that are a little further down that end up with similar outcomes to these guys in this role here. We'll see if I feel that way later on, but that's kind of how I feel. Now, um, I did pull up a little chart here that shows where all the quarterbacks are, like round wise right now, as of today. And you can see that there is some movement happening early on when it comes to the quarterbacks. You can see that Josh Allen's actually falling just a little bit. Drake May's falling a little bit. Who knows if 0.83 means anything or not, but he's showing that Lamar Jackson is rising. So let's see, Lamar Jackson rising just a tad. Jane Daniels rising just a tad. Jalen Hurts rising just a tad. So those are the ones that I mentioned. They seem to be rising a little bit. While on the flip side, these other guys are falling a little bit. Drake May's falling a little bit. Caleb Williams is falling a bit. Justin Herbert's falling a bit. Joe Burrow's actually rising a tad also, by the way. Justin Herbert's falling a little bit, and Jackson Dart's falling a little bit. So you can see that when it comes to these early quarterbacks, the ones that I had mentioned, I thought were interesting targets, they're actually kind of moving closer slowly up the board. Now, at the same time, let's see what's going on with the quarterbacks below that. So maybe from Trevor Lawrence on down. There's Shedeur Sanders, who we saw in here. When looking at these quarterbacks, in fact, I you can see that Lawrence and Stafford are falling just a little bit. But then, yeah, this is kind of what I was talking about. You can see here, the rest of these quarterbacks are all rising. Kyler's falling because of uncertainty, but then Young, Stroud, Ward, even Malik Willis, people are high on Malik Willis. Daniel Jones, they're all, even down here, Jacoby Brissett and Shedeur Sanders, they're rising as well. So basically, it seems like all the quarterbacks are getting pushed up, and some of these non-running or like not the highest running quarterbacks over here are kind of getting pushed down a little bit also. I feel like if all these quarterbacks start getting pushed up the board higher and higher and higher, it might make sense again to find your opportunities to grab earlier quarterbacks and then have more and ideally better position players to grab later, uh, while other people are sacrificing position player option to grab a mediocre quarterback higher than expected. So that they're oh, and then last thing, what would I maybe do differently with my draft here? I do like the idea of two quarterbacks here. I don't like the idea of Allen though, because I'm missing out on other players that are of um, high caliber. I kind of like the idea of going with a position player here in the third round. And then when you get into this fifth round, that's when you start evaluating something like Lamar Jackson, maybe. I don't know what's his ADP right now. Lamar Jackson is so actually he's risen a little bit into the fourth round. Yeah, right just into the fourth round, 47.8. And then if you look, he was like 50 point something or 55 on day one. So I think he rose a lot maybe on day one and a little bit on day two. Uh, so I do like the idea of evaluating Lamar in the fifth as opposed to Allen in the third. I like the idea of trying to go Zay Flowers like I did here, and then hope that you get Lamar Jackson in the fifth round. I think that's awesome. Again, so much higher end outcome at the position compared to the unknown here, and who knows for that one. And then can you get someone like Jane Daniels or Hurts coming back in the seventh? I do like the idea of that. Fifth and seventh, fifth and sixth and seventh. I don't know, something like that. I do like those. I think while these guys are at the prices they are, I might bypass Allen a little bit more. Or if I do take him for some reason, I'm not going to go and take another high end one because I feel like I've already passed up on so much capital here. So I'd change it up just a tad. But there you go. Pass up on Allen right now, maybe a little bit more while we kind of figure out what's going on. Now, as for example, Lamar Jackson, Hurts, Jane Daniels, whoever start to move up closer to Allen, then I don't think it makes as much of a difference because you're not going to be getting two of them anyways. So you just grab Allen, be happy that you have a high end quarterback, and then wait to take one much later on so you have good quality and quantity. But right now, when you grab two of these guys that are high quality later on, maybe get two of them. That's quarterbacks for you. Let me know what you think. Tell me in the comments. Peace.